Today's topic is wisdom. Now, somebody told me this morning they had already read Core 52, but they hadn't been here yet this year. So I'm going to confound you because we're not going in order of the chapters. Our very first week was chapter 41 or 42. This week, last week was chapter 41. This week is chapter 14. So we're going to bounce around. Today is wisdom. Our key verse is Proverbs 1:7, which goes like this: "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." Wisdom. Now, I could tell a story about wisdom. For example, this week, and I'm going to mention a guy's name, Cal Songer. Cal, I know you watch these videos, so you're going to make it into a sermon this week. So I talked to Cal Songer, an old cowboy out in Montana, and I call him up, and it's 14 below zero. Yeah, 14 below zero. And he says, "You called me at a good time. I'm back in the truck warming up my toes." And so I'm wondering, what's Cal doing out in the snow at 14 below zero? Would you wonder, maybe he's working? Is he playing? A little bit of both. He's shooting coyotes. And then he told me something interesting. He gets $60 a pelt. He's got a place that he takes them to. He doesn't even have to do anything. He just takes the coyote and they give him $60 just the way it is. And he gets to just shoot all day long. Wow. At 14 below. That might make you want to get out at 14 below, wouldn't it? Yeah? No, I'm going to do something really strange this morning. If you're visiting with us, not only is this a strange church because we do not take an offering. We've got offering boxes on the walls, and we just communicate to visitors, hey, church folk, support the church. We don't want you to feel compelled to give. You give for a different reason. That's because the Lord wants you to. So number one, we don't take an offering, but now I'm going to pass out checks. So I need the servers to come up for just a second, just 4 servers, and we're going to pass out checks. Yeah. I need 3 more servers. There's 2. Yeah, he's one of them white boys. Take this to Rick. Yeah. There you go. Now pass one out. Everybody take one. So everybody gets a check. You'll like it when you see it. Our printer, who is a Christian fellow, saw these and he thought, boy, this is a nice idea. This is a nice idea. Go ahead and get it. Everybody that gets one, go and fold it up, put it in your Bible, tuck it away. And we're going to talk about wisdom today with this check. They're kind of thick paper. Jimmy did thick paper. 1 for each person. There you go. So you take and look at it. It's check written on the bank of heaven. God has signed it, and you get to fill out whatever you want in that line. Can you imagine what that would be like? Can you imagine what it would be like for God to come to you and say to you, hey, listen, you ask me anything you want, and I will give it to you. Anything. What would you put in there? I mean, what would you write on this line? Think about it a moment. I want to give you a second. Yeah, we do some of those churchy things. I'm thinking, Lord, I just, I like that new lay there order this week. Now just help me pay for it. So, okay, you got it? Mm-hmm. This really did happen with someone. We're going to study a story this morning about an interesting fellow. And God shows up, and he tells him, you ask me anything you want, and I will give it to you. Now, you've had your thoughts. Let's go ahead and see this story. The guy's name is Solomon. and you probably already know how this is going to go if you're any bit of a Bible scholar at all. We're going to turn to 1 Kings chapter 3, and we're going to bounce around in the book of 1 Kings. Cover a lot of territory. Actually, we're going to cover Solomon's life. Now, here's a little background. I grew up being taught that Solomon was 19 years old when this following scene takes place. That's not necessarily true. People are all over the page on how old he was. There is no doubt that he was young. He could have been 19 or 20. Truth is, different scholars, Irenaeus is one of those, Josephus is another, they peg him much younger. Because as he talks about being a little child. So some estimates go all the way down to 11 or 12. Most people, though, put him probably in the ballpark of being about 14 years old when his father David turns the kingdom over to him. Now, can you imagine? And Dad has done a pretty good job of uniting Israel. Took him a long time. I mean, it took him 7 years just to get basically started. So Dad was king for 40 years total, and now he's an old man, he's on his deathbed, and he hands the kingdom over to Solomon, who's just a kid. And says, okay, you get to take this all over. It's your job now. How would you feel if something like that happened? If all of a sudden you have a big, awesome job. 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 3. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David. So he's already been made king. This is just shortly thereafter. Except, now notice what it says. This is going to be important. You might want to highlight this in your Bible. So he showed his love for the Lord by walking according to the instructions given him by his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burned incense on the high places. That's not a good thing. That's to other gods. So that's an idea that maybe already at this early age of Solomon's life, he's already got some problems. But however, things are still pretty good. So the king went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices that was the most important high place, and Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. Verse 5. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a dream, and God said, ask for whatever you want me to give you. He just got his blank check. You just got your blank check. What would you ask for? I mean, how do you think Solomon answered? If you know the rest of the story, don't share. But remember, he's a teenager when this happens. I don't know about you, but there's not too many teenagers I would trust with big decisions. Can you imagine you pick your local, and 14, we're either talking 9th grader at the high school or maybe an 8th grader at the junior high. Do you know some of those guys? I do. I know far too many. Maybe we even have some school teachers in the room right now. And I'm not sure about you, but there's not too many 14-year-olds I'd hand the keys to the kingdom with. I wouldn't do it. Hey, you're now president of the United States. Run it as you see fit. Right? So here's God, and he adds to that, and he says, Solomon, you ask me whatever you want. So how do you think he answered? Well, as a teen. So Solomon answered, you have shown great kindness to your servant, my father David, because he was faithful to you and righteous and upright in heart. You have continued this kindness to him and have given him a son to sit on his throne this very day. That sounds pretty good for a 14-year-old, doesn't it? Or even a 19-year-old. Now, Lord, my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. And here's where we get our dilemma. But I am only a little child. So that's one of the hints. We might be wrong that he's only 19. I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duties. How many honest men do you know that's that honest enough to say, I might not know everything? It's like me admitting this morning that the people have found some mistakes on the website because I try to be like Mary Poppins, practically perfect in every way. And so now the armor is a tiny bit tarnished. Yeah, you found out I have some chinks in my armor. So, verse 8, your servant is here among the people you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern the great people of yours? Wow, what an answer. Hey, God, help me get this done. Show me the way, because I'm a kid, I don't know how to do this, and I've got a big job. So, how do you think he did? And again, he's a teenager. I mean, how do you think he did? Now, let's look and see what God had to say in response. Verse 10. The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for the discernment in administering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, and this is the part that I love, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Do you realize that at the height of his power and his reputation, I mean, people were coming from all over the world. Remember the Queen of Sheba? I mean, she comes just to marvel at what Solomon was able to accomplish. I mean, it was fantastic. And he was known not just for riches, not just for the spread of the kingdom, not just for everything that had been done. He was known also for his knowledge and his wisdom. I mean, he did. He got to be pretty big stuff. So, that's a big promise from God. I'm going to give you everything you've asked for. Moreover, verse 13, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you, here's an if statement. And if you walk in obedience to me and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life. Then Solomon awoke, and he realized it had been a dream. He returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. And he gave a feast for all his court. Wow. Pretty cool, right? Are you like me? I grew up in the church. I was baptized when I was 12. I know this story. But do you really remember the rest of the story? One of our problems in Bible study is we kind of pick these things apart. We don't cover like entire books in one sermon. We're going to try this one. We're just going to try and cover Solomon's story. So he became king. He actually restructures the personnel. There were some of his dad's personnel. They needed to be gone. He starts to make allegiances with these other people, and one of the groups that he makes an allegiance with is the king of Egypt, Pharaoh. He marries one of his daughters. That does not end up well. So, here he is. He prays for the wisdom. He receives it. And then he starts to organize everything. Everything goes well. I mean, Sheba comes to visit him. Things go really, really, really well. He builds the temple. But do you remember how that goes in Scripture? And we find out about Solomon not only in 1 Kings, but also in 2 Chronicles. And so you can, if you want to do a little research on your own, go back and just look and see how things went. Solomon did a great job in building the temple. He did a bigger job in building his palace, which might be an indicator of where some of his passions lay. Yeah, not good. He continues to build the kingdom, and then something interesting happens after the queen shoot. We get this little note, and it has to do with Solomon and his women. Solomon apparently liked women. When it comes to wisdom, I would not put this in the wisdom category. You remember the stats? How many? 700 wives. 700. Oh, we're not even going there. I'm not going there. Elder's wife. You can't trust them to be straight-laced in church at all. Oh, man. So, yeah, 700. There are some logistic issues there if you think about wives. But 300 concubines. And here's how it goes. A wife is a wife. And generally for the king, one of the reasons Solomon got to be so powerful is because the wives tended to be daughters of other kings. So he makes these allegiances with these other kings. He marries these wives. They are wives. But concubines, basically it's a girlfriend, but they're still important. They tended to be merchants or powerful men's daughters. Still in allegiance, but they're not quite as high up on the social scale as a king's daughter. Now, you do the math. For those of you who have one wife, I'm in that category. Just so you know, how difficult is that to manage that one wife? I love the news interviews. I'll watch the news interviews, and they'll have the people that are visiting, and they're from out of town, and 50 years of marriage. Have you ever noticed how the husbands answer? What's the secret to 50 years of marriage? You know what the most common answer is? Say yes. Say yes. Yes. They just decide what hills not to die on. Things like that. It's like, I found out how I can stay married for 50 years. I build a workshop and I go out there and hide. Man cave. Man whatever. Say yes. What would it be like with 1,000? Well, that's funny, yes. But this got serious because you know what this meant. They bring in from their culture, not only their cultural identity, but one of the problems was these women brought in their religious worship. And Solomon, just like those guys on TV, just take the microphone away and tell them, no, be a man. Well, no, now I've suddenly got half the congregation is mad at me. No, but anyway, you start to build temples to satisfy those wives. And you open up idolatry to the entire nation like never before. And that was the beginning and the end of Solomon. I mean, it got really bad. It did. He rules also for 40 years. He finally passes on, and the kingdom that God's so angry with him, and we'll get to it. But God's so angry with him, he tells him, he says, I'm going to divide your kingdom. I'm not going to do it because I'm honoring your dad. I'm not going to do it while you're alive. I'm going to wait till your son gets on the throne. And by the way, he did such a poor job of being a husband. He did even worse job of being a dad. So his son was an idiot, and he assumed the throne. And just divided the kingdom. God was right. Let's see how that story goes. 1 Kings chapter 11. We'll start at verse 9. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord. Wow, this guy who loved the Lord so much at the beginning, at 14, loves the Lord, asks for wisdom. He's given knowledge and wisdom. He's given more than he's asked for. You know, and for those who are in Bible study this morning, doesn't this go right along with that model prayer? So the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of your father David, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hand of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but will give him one tribe. For the sake of David my servant, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen." Now that's a sad story, isn't it? So what does Solomon teach us? We actually have a huge amount of words from Solomon. We've got quite a bit. I like to, at times like this, as I just reminisce about Solomon and his great wisdom, I like to turn to one of the books that he authored. You're thinking Proverbs? No. I'm thinking Ecclesiastes. Let's look at Ecclesiastes. Chapter 1, verse 1. This is the microphone in New York, and the weather gal is out there and asking him, what's the secret to 50 years of marriage to 1,000 women? No. This is Solomon. The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Verse 2. Wow, that doesn't start off too well. Meaningless. Meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Ecclesiastes is not a fun book. If you've ever perused it, it's a downer. Don't drink half a bottle of whiskey. Sit down, read Ecclesiastes, and this is after a bad month, and you've got unpaid bills. This, you don't want to start out. Number one, you're going to pass out before the book is over with. Number two, the whole half a bottle of whiskey is, yeah. But it is a downer, because by the time he writes Ecclesiastes, he's burned out. He's got all this, he had this wisdom. But it doesn't seem to benefit him much. It's a sad ending. So let's look at the ending. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 13. So here he is. Finally, something dawns in his life. That's the whole story. Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey his commands, for this is everyone's duty. God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad. Wow. 40 years, really, Solomon? 1,000 women. Handshakes with who knows how many kings and business people and whatnot. Studying like you would not believe. In order to get that sort of knowledge, you just read a lot. Especially back in those days, no TV, just so you know. So you couldn't watch arts and entertainment or whatever. It wasn't there. You had to read a book. And he read, and he read, and he wrote. And then he comes to that conclusion, after saying for 11 chapters, everything's meaningless. Everything's in vain. Life pretty much stinks. And then to come up with two verses, and Let's do it again. That's the whole story. Here now is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey His commands, for this is everyone's duty. God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad. So I guess it didn't matter if I took your picture this morning and you didn't want to be seen with who you're with. So you're going to end up on the website anyway. God knows. So what do we learn? Here's what wisdom is not. Do you know wisdom is not necessarily knowledge? We have a predisposition in this country towards a few things. Number one, I caution people about what Bible you choose. Choose a Bible for what the Bible says. Don't choose a Bible for a commentary that goes with it, because a lot of times the commentaries can be wrong. I'm not a big fan of some of the commentaries. But because and here's our problem, because it's on the printed page, we think it carries authority. And the only authority really when it comes to the Bible is the Bible. But the other thing that we have a problem with is if somebody has a lot of degrees, they've got a lot of knowledge. I don't know about you, but some of the stupidest people I've known are some of the most educated people I know. Do you know anybody like that? Oh, we can name names. I could just go down the list of Congress. I mean, you know. I mean, really. Just because somebody is educated, just because they have knowledge, does not mean they are wise. And here's the irony about Solomon's life. He was given much wisdom, and the word that we translate into wisdom has dual meaning. Solomon not only had great wisdom, he also had great knowledge. But he used one to his detriment, and the other he did not use. Do you realize that's the big lesson from the wisest man who ever lived? He used knowledge. He made deals like you wouldn't believe. And a deal does not necessarily mean it's good in the long run. It especially doesn't mean it's on God's page. And so, what is wisdom not? Number one, it's not education and knowledge. And it's not intelligence. We make a big deal about IQ in our culture. And you know, my granddaughter, I love her to death. Her name is Lily too, and I'm really, she's not even in here. Lily's not here. I'm a big fan of lilies. I love lilies. Girls named Lily. You know, I do. And it could be because I have a granddaughter, Lily. Last year, on her pre-ACT, she scored a 27. That's big. You know, there are people who take and they look at those and they can tell you what they think your IQ is because of what you did. Her parents want her to go to Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt, she could get in there. But Vanderbilt, you need an IQ of 130 or above. And that ACT is one of those things that doesn't. But I'm back to the whole intelligence versus wisdom thing. Some of the wisest people I've ever known use gorsh and golly. One of the wisest men I ever knew would come out and greet his crew, and I was his son's best friend. And he owned a construction company. He had a 4th grade education. He wore a dirty, old, white, stained t-shirt to work every day because we did grunt work. We built swimming pools. And he would have those boots, not Western boots, those work boots, and he'd have those green work pants, and one of the pant legs every single morning would be stuck up on top of that boot. Always had a big chaw, a red man. I mean, big chaw. I mean, he would half a package. You know, he would go and he would buy Red Man by the case and throw it in the front of his truck. And he put that red man in there, and most people just took and looked at him and thought, here's a country bumpkin. Tried to take advantage of him. One of the smartest men I ever knew in my life. And also one of the wisest. Great guy. Great guy. Intelligence does not mean wisdom. So what does it mean? Wisdom, at least the start of wisdom is this. So let's go back to that key verse. Just what Solomon said, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. You want to start it off? You better respect somebody who can vaporize you with a word. I mean, you better respect that God is God, and you're not. And that's the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. And that's one of the first things you'll learn about wisdom. I would rather have someone who will tell me they are sorry and that they were wrong, hands down, any day, than someone who cannot admit they're wrong. It's scriptural. It's right. But unfortunately, it's not the mark of a lot of us. You want wisdom in your life? And this is just the beginning. Memorize that verse. That's our key verse for the week. But also start to live it. Be in awe of God. And isn't, we've forgotten what that word means. And I just kind of think, when you think of God, or better yet, when you meet Him in a setting like this and you know that God's at work in a place like that, I feel it every day. I feel God's Holy Spirit at work here like you would not believe. I know great things are happening. And there's a certain aspect that you just sit back and you say, wow. Wow. Not because of anything I do, not because of anything Gary does or Bill or the countless folks who work around here and do things. I go, wow, because God's doing something big. And then the second thing is, I'm 61 years old, and I'm about as dumb as a brick sometimes. And I do a lot of wrong things. I apparently typed in OD instead of OF, or a couple other things like that. So I'm not like Mary Poppins. I am not practically perfect in everything. But there's times I need to be reminded that I'm not perfect. Just because God needs to work in my life. I'm going to hand this over to whoever's doing our communion. Thank you.